Hi, this is Christy with Life Struggles, and today I'm so happy to introduce Megan. She's from New Zealand, and she's here to talk to us about grief. Hi, Megan.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on. There's so many people I feel like you can help.
It's good.
Okay, so can you tell me who it is that you lost,
hmm
and you can just go ahead and start telling your story.
Yep, sure. Okay, so I lost my husband 2 years ago. He had a liver transplant in 2017, and so had been sick for 4 years previous to that. And um, what the liver transplant was very successful, and he unfortunately got a flu of some sort, and died quite suddenly in 2019. It was relatively unexpected, and so I have three young children, and at the point that he died, I had a 9-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 13-year-old. So they were quite young, and quite a pivotal time in their life to lose their father, who unfortunately, which is a bit of an inside joke, he was actually a really good father and a really good husband. So
He wasn't, or he was?
he was a
Okay.
very good father, very good husband. And my son often comments to me, I sometimes wish he wasn't. Would it make the loss easier? But in saying that, he's modeled to them what it means to be a good man. So they've at
That's
least had
good.
that. Yeah.
Let me ask you something. What did he have a liver disease to begin with? Why did he have to have a transplant?
Yeah, so his backstory is quite interesting. He lost his dad. So he died at 52, and then his dad died at 52 actually as well.
Wow.
He lost his dad when he was 16, and he went off the rails. He got into drugs, and heavy drugs, and he went to jail quite young and got into big trouble. And he was doing, oh, I think that damaged his
The
his body
his
quite early
liver?
on. He went to a rehabilitation clinic, and he became a counselor, and he got a degree in counseling, and he became CEO of a big company. And it's an amazing story,
But it was too
um,
late.
but too late really for someone who had done a lot of damage to his body in the early years.
Do
And
you
they
know,
think
was
he
he drinking too?
Yep, and he also didn't look after himself.
No.
He was in high stress jobs, traveling, and he just it was he was an amazing man, and it's almost like he lived his life day to day. He lived for the day and the moment, and um, not ideal when you've got three children to live
Well,
like
let me
that.
bring you back to, when did you meet him? Like, what?
I met him when I was about 15, and he was already in a rehabilitation clinic at that stage, and so I wasn't interested. So we'd been friends for a very long time, and we ended up together when he was in his much more settled period, where he was doing extremely well in leadership roles. And so yeah,
Was
but
he
I'd
older
seen
than
him
you?
through this. Pardon?
Was he older than you?
Yes, 8 years older than me.
8 years?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so doing the math, he was like 23 when you met him? No.
No,
Oh, I thought you
when
said
yes, he was
15.
23. That's right.
Okay.
That's right. He was 20. Yeah, doing the maths, he was 23.
Okay.
I've always been with older men actually, because I just find men take a little longer to mature. Yeah.
I agree with you, but I think anymore, like I keep saying to everybody, I don't know why. I don't know about your country, but in our country, they consider 18 to be an adult.
Yes,
There's
same.
no way. There is
No,
no way at 18. I mean, my kids have been raised well, but I can tell you at 18, they're not ready to be out on their own. And I've raised them to do all the things, but they're still not mature enough. They still
no,
haven't gone through enough to make adult decisions. Maybe
no.
some smaller ones. You know what I'm saying?
I think boys, particularly with the frontal lobe,
They're a little
I've
bit
got
right.
they're slower to develop. I've got two.
Correct.
I've got a 14-year-old boy and an 11-year-old boy now, and you know, I can see they're quite different to their older sister, and they
Absolutely.
take time. And I'm not saying that all men are immature, but for me, I think I just needed an intellectual match for myself, and so I tended to go with older men.
So you didn't have like any when you were growing up, like father issues where
Maybe. I mean, I grew up on a farm in a rural area, and my father was very hard on us. He had very high expectations of our work ethic. He wasn't very loving, but that was very typical period in the 1950s. The children of World War II tended to be they didn't show a lot of affection. They were often children of damaged veterans themselves. So New Zealand was quite affected by that. And so quite affected by World War I and II. Yeah. So I think, to be honest, I might have had some father issues, but I definitely searched for someone that could meet me in an intellectual space, but also be a loving person, of which my husband is quite the opposite to my father.
So you searched for somebody that would be giving you affection too, not just the intellectual, but the affection, which the affection you didn't get by your father, but it wasn't that he set out to do that. That's just that was just the way that they were then.
Yeah, that's the way he was raised.
Right. But I could see where you would search out for that. I mean, I think I suppose not all of us want it, you know, or care that we have it. I've met people that don't care one way or the other, you know. That, for me, you know, that's just my own personal opinion. I'm not making a judgment, but I see a lot where people choose somebody that can help them in their career, you know, or help them raise their children, and they don't have to be in love with them, you know.
Yeah.
They just don't want to be alone.
I think, I mean, I met my soulmate. He was my soulmate, and all my friends, my family, all talk about what an amazing relationship we had, and we did have an amazing relationship. And so, for the time that I had him, he was everything that I needed. And now I'm sort of like, I'm 48, and I'm like, I don't see myself ever meeting another person like him. I feel like I've lived I've known love, and part of the grief is knowing love. So when you've had love, that's the loss, you know, is that you lose that amazing connection. And in fact, I'm so thankful and grateful for that. Look, because so many people don't have that.
Right.
So in some ways, I don't feel like I've lost. I feel like I've gained. So, you know, that's from many perspectives. Yeah.
I don't want to go into too much of myself, but just because of what you said, my first love that I was going to be married to was, well, actually his father. On the day that I was coming back from my last vacation with my family as a college student, and then we were going to start planning our wedding. And oh my gosh, it was awful being away from him for, you know, it was 2 weeks. And back then you didn't have cell phones. You know, you had your regular phone, but it cost a lot of money to call, you know, and oh my gosh, I missed him so much. But I did get to call him when we're on our way, and we drove because there was like my mom, my dad, and then 4 siblings. So it was cheaper to drive than to fly. Anyway, so it was like a 12-hour drive. And like that was the longest 12 hours of my life. But when I got home, he was sitting on the step waiting for me, but he wasn't happy. And I knew something was wrong right away. And his dad that morning was killed in a car accident. And he felt like it was his fault because he wasn't sure when I would be home, but he knew that day. So he didn't want to go help his dad deliver in case he wanted to be at my house when. And so he feels like had he been in the vehicle, he would have seen the car that was going to run the light and you know, stopped it. He blamed himself. And it ended up within a year of tearing us apart. He went into the drugs, everything he could to take that pain away.
Mm.
And then I ended up, there was nothing I could do, and you can't with somebody like that until they're ready. I tried.
Yeah.
His mom tried, his sister tried, we all tried, and he, just wasn't ready then. And, so I went on with my life eventually. But what I want to say is that I always compared him to every man I ever met, and nobody measured up. And to this day, I can tell you, I had to just give in and go, okay, there's not going to be somebody just like him. But he was my soulmate too. And so I know what you're feeling. And it took me a really, really long time to give up that thing of I'm going to find somebody like him, because it's not going to happen. I believe you can have similar. I believe
you can have similar.
Yeah, you can have similar, but you can't have the same person.
No, and that's okay. I think you have to accept that. I accept that I had a pretty special person, but and that's okay. I do accept that.
Okay. All right. Well, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's all good.
When I heard that part, so do you remember where you were, so we can go back to
that? Yeah, I suppose where I go from here is just how I think probably I have not really dealt with my grief personally, because as a mother, when their dad dies, immediately you're jumping in to protect your children.
Of course.
So I think I've probably put my grief on hold to a certain point, and I can kind of see that. And just dealing with, now I've got preteen to teenage children. It's a really, really tricky time just being a teenager, let alone being a teenager without a dad. So I've poured myself into being the best mum that I can be to them. And
you
so
don't think that you can do that and also deal with your grief at the same time?
I think I probably could, but I guess I think I'm probably not ready. Yeah, that's a really good question. I question myself regularly, and I know that I should probably jump into some counselling. Well, all my children have had grief counselling. It's been really good for them. And they go in and out of counselling when they need it. So I know that I'm kind of keeping that at bay. And that's probably not something I should do for too much longer.
Well, just so you know, that's what I specialize in. So you can always, and I'll give them to you free. We do it with Zoom. Okay, so if you do need to talk, at least you know that not only am I, a counselor, but I've also been there. So I can relate to someone. I mean, everybody's loss is different. Even if I'm saying it's my spouse, and he went in a horrible way, but all of them are horrible, and you just can't compare it to somebody else's. So I can offer empathy, what I'm saying? And I can share what worked for me, which wouldn't mean that it would work for you. But there's a lot of steps and stuff like that. So anyway, okay, so you really haven't dealt with your grief yet, you feel like?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I have and I haven't. I'm from an Indigenous tribe in New Zealand. So the way we deal with death is, how do I put it? I think far more useful and in a better way than the Western culture in New Zealand does. So we have like 3-day, 4-day funerals with hundreds of people that turn up, and we, it's a ritualistic thing that's been going for hundreds of years. So, and we also then you grieve for the following year, and you have rituals that follow that. So in my culture,
can you tell us what that is?
So when you're the widow, you are then mourning for the entire year. You're given space. as a widow and as a family, from work, or not necessarily from work, but from any stresses. You get a huge amount of support in your village. So I live in my village, my Indigenous village, and so do my children. So a huge amount of support from extended family. You have an unveiling of the headstone a year later, which means that you've been in the world of a spiritual world of death for a year, and you're allowed to mourn and allowed to be given space to do that. And then after that, in that year, and the unveiling, which is a year later, is like coming back into the light, into the world of the living. So you go through these very long death processes in our culture that has meant that I've dealt with it.
You're supposed to be doing your healing. Is that?
Yes, you're meant to, but you're never really fully healed, but you're meant to be giving yourself a break and actually giving yourself time to cry and grieve. So in the funeral process, people wail. It's quite frightening if you're a Western person coming into our what we call a tangi, which is a funeral, because there's wailing and the snot and crying, and it's cathartic weeping for days over the body.
And your children saw that?
My children have grown up with that, so that's the only funeral process that they've ever known. No, they've been to. So our whole world is life and death culturally, from an Indigenous perspective, where we bury our dead. We deal with our dead really well, and it's something that we do. We lean into. So our children know that there's life and death go together. And so their whole life has been involved in these funeral process, and my sons have learnt to dig graves in a cultural way. So there's all this engaged process in the death process, and so my children that was just normal to them.
But what about you? So you've got 3 children, and well, number one, they weren't really old enough to know what they were going to experience yet, but they also, you made it sound like anyway that they have been through like that before. Was there another family member that they had went through the funeral process, or they heard the yelling and crying and all that?
I mean, that's the only thing that we've really known. In fact, when my children have been to Western funerals, and they've only been to a few in their lifetime, they've been quite shocked by them. They've been like, where's the emotion? Right. Where's the crying? Like the funeral processes from a Western perspective in New Zealand are, you turn up, the body's there, there's a speech, there might be some images of them, they get taken away in a hearse, generally cremated, which we don't cremate. We always bury. There's sandwiches and cups of tea afterwards, and that's it. And so that's been quite shocking to my children. And in fact, New Zealanders are tending now to follow our process. So now people are opting to bring bodies into their house and have like 3-day kind of like a wake, I suppose, of such, like where you actually grieve over that. So you actually see the dead. Because I think that's my cat. I think there's some need to really understand that person's not there. You know what I mean? So to really understand that they're gone.
Wow. I mean, it is what it is. That's your culture. But I remember when my dad passed away, it was sudden. He actually took a trip. He decided to take a trip on his own. And he took a camper trailer behind his truck, and he was going all the way across the United States to camp with some guy friends and fish and all that kind of stuff. And he ended up, when he got into Oregon, having a stroke while he was driving. But he saw a sign for a hospital. I don't know what you guys call them. Do you call them hospitals? Okay.
Yep, we
So
do.
he
Yep.
signed, an exit that said hospital, and it was a veterans hospital. So he got off on there and he went in there. So it wasn't a massive stroke, but he knew he had one. And while they were doing whatever they do for a stroke, he had a massive heart attack.
Right.
And he lived through it. But so I flew there. And they told me that he could not come back home, that he needed to have heart surgery to repair the heart, but his body wasn't strong enough yet because he went through the stroke and the heart attack. So he had to rest for 6 weeks, but he couldn't do it in the hospital. So he had to stay in a camper. Okay. Well, I couldn't take off work or leave my kids and all that for 6 weeks. So I had to come back home, and then he just would call me every night at the same time and check in, and we would talk. And so anyway, he ended up having another heart attack while he was on the campground. And so then I drove out because I thought that I was going to get to bring his body back home. I didn't know how expensive it was going to be to do that. But anyway, they had to preserve him while waiting for me to get there. And there was a huge snowstorm, and I couldn't go anywhere. So I was stuck. I was like halfway there, and then I was stuck, and I had to stay in a hotel, which they didn't have any rooms. So I was in a hallway with a cot. That is hard. Anyway, you've lost your father, and you weren't expecting it. He wasn't sick, as far as you knew or anything. And, then you got to go out there and then you're stuck and you can't go anywhere. And oh my, it was not good, but I got there finally. So he had been 5 days, I believe, 5 or 6 days. And then they had him all set up for me to come in and see him and whatever, but they didn't embalm him. Do you guys do embalming?
Generally, depends.
Okay, so because they were preserving him for me to say my goodbyes or whatever, they didn't embalm him. So when you don't embalm somebody, their whole body fills up. So he looked like he was like 400 pounds. It didn't look like him. That was a shock in itself. And I was like, this is not my dad. You've got the wrong person. And they explained to me, why his body was all swollen and so on and so forth. But then they just left me alone in this dark room with the candle burning to just and take as long as I wanted. And I was by myself, and to me, it was scary. I think it was probably my first time with death. I mean, my grandma and grandpa, but I was young, and I didn't go through like sitting there alone in a room and dark and with, I don't want to make it sound so morbid, but it did feel morbid to me.
Yeah.
And actually I had nightmares for a long time, and until I started talking to a counselor, and they, I believe in God, and I have, the religion that I believe in. And I went and talked to our pastor and said, I'm having these nightmares and I can't sleep, and it was all about him dying alone, and then me being in that room with him alone. And he kept sitting up from being dead. It was awful. And he said, I think you need to just really pray about it and maybe see if God won't give you some words, or, but you need to let go of all that. And it's really amazing. But my dad actually talked to me in one of my dreams. And I can't tell you what he looked like or anything. I just heard his words, and he said, I'm okay. He kept saying, I'm okay. And then I thought I was crazy. And when I told my pastor about that, he said, I would accept that. I would accept it, whether it was, an intervention with God, or whether, it was your father's soul, whatever, I would just accept it and believe that he's okay, and try to go on, because that's what he'd want you to do. So my point was, it was awful. And I can't imagine you guys having to look at somebody that you've lost for 3 days and mourn. I mean, I can't even imagine. I'm so sorry, but
it's actually really uplifting. I mean, I've grown up in my Indigenous village with my culture, so I've only known that as well. So death is very, very real and very a full part of our existence. So I've seen hundreds of bodies, like it's not, and all sorts.
But does it make the closure any better, or
I think yeah, it does, because we have to put, like, for example, there's a cathartic moment where the family has to put the lid on the coffin and say goodbye. And so the children, so you can imagine the wailing and everything becomes very cathartic at that point, where you're actually having to say goodbye to your father or your son or whoever it might be. So there's lots of tears. And so for my children, that was a very final part of the process.
I think that's grieving. I mean, if you can cry and face, that's the beginning of grieving.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a lot of crying. Yeah, I did, but I think I was probably in a little bit of shock. I think as a mother, I immediately went into a bit of shock. I mean, I didn't cry a lot. I mean, I did and I didn't. I couldn't really tell you. I think I was quite spaced out,
numb,
numb. But I was in shock. I was keep thinking practically, like, right, what do I need to do next? My children, just as a mother, you just kick into the mother instinct, which is you've got your 3 baby cubs, and like, how are you going to protect them? So that's all I was thinking about at that
basically point. Even though you cried, you had to put all of your attention into taking care of your children.
Yeah, exactly.
And making sure they were okay. So your own feelings were kind of put on the back burner.
Yeah, and I think I'm actually really grateful that I had 3 children, because one, they are the reincarnation, not if you believe in that, I don't really necessarily believe in that, but of him. So I see them. I see him every day in my children, and he's there, particularly in what my middle boy, who's just the spitting image of his father in every way.
Hopefully that makes you happy.
It makes me extremely happy, and I'm like, oh, there he is. And right. So I'm so privileged to have three of him. And I think of widows who haven't had children and haven't got that support around them. What is very hard, must be very hard. And I can say that I've had all the support, and with my children, it gives me strength every day, and it gives me a reason to get up. So I haven't got space to be moping around or sit in bed all day. Like I literally have to be there for my children. And
I don't know. I mean, I always tell people that the worst thing you can do is mope around, but you also need to, it's extremely emotionally tiring when you lose somebody. And so did you ever have, like, was your mother still alive?
Yeah, my mum and dad are still alive. They live on a farm just over the hill from me.
So were they able to be there quite a bit?
Yeah. Oh yeah. They're like my children's parents. And we've grown up next to each other in my village. So I've got a lot of external support, which has been amazing.
So did they ever come over and say, why don't you just go get some rest and we'll take over? Yeah. So you got to go to your room and rest. And okay, so that's part of healing too.
Very much so.
Okay, so see, I'm seeing, even though you maybe feel like you didn't go through grieving, I think you have gone through some.
I definitely have, and I've listened to a lot of podcasts actually.
What kind?
Well, there's one that I really love called Griefcast, and it's an English podcast they're basically actors and comedians
Okay.
and they're quite famous people, and they
Okay.
talk about a loved one that they've lost. And I guess what that gave me was, because New Zealanders, and you haven't interviewed New Zealanders before, but we're a funny lot. We are quite English. So, you know,
I love English. So
we're very English. And so we're quite what's the word? We lack a bit of connection to our emotions. And we're
okay.
quite macabre, I think, in the way we can laugh at ourselves.
Right.
Very sarcastic. And so I really appreciated this podcast because it connected with my comedic side.
Okay.
But also these were very famous people that had lost fathers and mothers very young. And what that said to me was, out of loss comes resilience. And I think for my children, when we looked at these famous people and we listened to podcasts, and my son, he started Googling famous American presidents and all this amazing leaders. He's like, my goodness, Mum, all these amazing men, they've lost fathers really young. And I said, you know, son, that actually there's a lot to be said about that, because sometimes you can make something out of loss. You know, you can
Absolutely.
become something. Your backbone can become so much stronger. And I feel that's where my children have a little edge on their peers, because
Sure.
they understand what loss really looks like, and how to really fight day in, day out to be the best person they can be, because life on this earth is really short.
You know, I feel like they're really lucky that they have had this experience with even though to me it sounds kind of scary, but then with all that support, which not everybody gets that
No.
at all. So with all that support, and you seem very upbeat and positive. And if, like, some people don't think they should laugh, you know, afterwards, and laughing is a very good way of helping heal, you know. I mean, so is crying, you know, but you don't want to just cry. So I don't know how much you know about crying, but we have tear ducts, and those tear ducts actually, when you cry, they release endorphins, which make you feel better. And that's why it's a good thing to cry. Is it a good thing to cry all the time? No. You know, no. But it's good to laugh too.
Yeah.
I don't know about. So I would love to hear, like, if you can, well, I can write it down. But you can tell everybody about the name of this podcast, because I love listening to podcasts. That's what, like, I do that so much.
Yeah,
Especially if
it's
I'm
an
on.
amazing one. It's an amazing podcast. I just listened to one, Jimmy Carr. He's a famous comedian, English comedian. So the
Who?
podcast is called Griefcast. So it's
Griefcast?
just, yeah, Griefcast, and it's Carriad Lloyd is the interviewer. So Carriad spelled Cariad.
Wait a minute. CAR?
Yep, IAD. That's her first name.
Okay.
And her surname is Lloyd. I think it's LLOYD. But you'll find Griefcast, because I think it's won the top podcast in Britain for last couple of years. It's amazing.
On Spotify or?
On Spotify.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And there's a few American interviews as well. So she's branched out and done some of particular actors that have lost a child or a close loved one. And it was really important for me, because I felt like, actually, I think you, Kat, actually, I'm not alone. I think, you know, because sometimes you just feel so alone in your grief.
That's my whole purpose too, is to make sure that people know, you know, that they're not alone, that somebody else has gone through this too. And by listening to the way that somebody else has handled it, and that and what they've gone through, is a big part too of helping them. So
I also think it's important, because I said to my children, we're in the club. I call it, we're in a club. So we're in the grief club. And so my son, actually, who's in a rugby team, so rugby's really big in New Zealand.
Is that kind of like, wait, is that with the stick?
No, it's just a ball, but we
So
don't
kind of
have
like
all the
soccer?
headgear. It's kind of like gridiron, but we don't have all the headgear and stuff. We're a bit crazy. Go away, cat. And so anyway, rugby's really big, but he's been in this rugby team for 8 years. And so he lost his dad, my son. And then 6 months ago, his friend in the same rugby team lost his dad. And
And
we
how
were
old
just
is this son now?
so this boy would have been
Yours.
13. My
Yours.
son's now 14.
14.
And
Okay.
so he's been in this rugby team for a long time. And so he's like, oh, well, I said, well, he's in the club. There's a special club. It's the Grief Club. And you only know about it until you don't want to be in it. You don't want to invite people to be in the club, but you're in it. And as soon as you're in it, there's an empathy between each other because you know what it's like. And, it's a bond that you have. And in fact, no one escapes the club. Everyone is going to be in the club at some point.
Yeah. And that's what I try to teach my kids with life comes death. And that's just a natural part of the cycle. Unfortunately, when you don't know when that's going to be.
No.
As a child going through it, sometimes they're too young to even remember it. And that may be a good thing, but they can also be mentally damaged from that too. So it still comes down to how another person or parent or grandparent, or like you got a whole group of people that are there to help you through that.
Totally. I think talking, if you've got children or you've got a friend that's lost someone, talking is hugely important about them. My son often talks about how he lives with a hole in his heart and the hole will never heal. It'll always be there, but he's just trying to kind of work around it. And, the hole feels really big sometimes. He said, sometimes I'm in the supermarket, Mum, and I can smell a smell that's just like Dad. And the hole's just boom,
just
there
like Dad.
So he'll get a sense or get a sensory of something, and it takes him back to his father. And he says,
when the whole thing or a bad
it's a good thing, but he says the hole feels really deep and big just for that, because grief hits you at the weirdest moments. People often say to me, oh, are you doing anything for his birthday, or are you celebrating Father's Day? Honestly, those moments actually pass us by a lot of the time. Of course, we recognize them, but the moments where it hurts and hits you, they come from the weirdest places. Like listening to a song in the car,
right?
And all of a sudden I'm bawling, I'm crying because it's or it's a smell or a food or someone said something. That they're the moments where he floods back into our lives, not necessarily the big moments. And I think it's it's just learning to live with what my son says, the hole in the heart.
So
which will always be there. He's my middle son, actually. I've got my oldest is a daughter who's 15, who's probably struggled the most because her father did treat her like his princess.
So how is she, when you say she struggles the most?
I think she talks the least. She bottles up the most. She's been in some really good counselling, which has been useful. She's also 15 and a teenage girl. So it's hard to extrapolate what's hormones versus what's grief.
Right.
It's a hard period to lose your dad. My son.
How old was she when she lost Dad?
She was 13. She was 13 when he died, and so now she's 15.
So she was already beginning that when the hormones are changing and all that. Yeah. So that must have been a horrible time for her.
It's been very, very hard on her, and she is going to struggle for the rest of her life, I think, to live without her dad, who was just such a brilliant dad to her, just the most loving, wonderful dad. But I can say that he's taught her what a good man looks like, and she knows
that's a good thing.
What love is, what love should look like from a man, and what it means to love a daughter. And so I hand on my heart, I think that she's got that, and she understands what that is.
Absolutely,
it's important.
And then how old was the youngest?
My youngest was 9, so he's so, and because he spent most of his life with a sick father, so he was always ill in and out of hospital, and he had his liver transplant. He sort of attached himself to me, so he's like my little cub who still attaches himself to me, still sleeps in my bed now and again. I'm his world. I'm everything.
That's interesting because it could have went either way. A lot of times when a young child is around where one of their parents is sick and is going through a lot of surgeries and hospitalization and not feeling good at home and stuff, that the mother or the wife, is taking care of them. And so they don't have the time even. So I'm not saying that in a negative way, it's just how it is, but they're giving that attention to that person. And the children feel like they've been neglected, or sometimes even bitter that person was sick and taken away their time from their other parent. So it sounds like you were really good at being able to not only be there for your husband, but also for your children while he was sick.
I think I was there more for my children than I was my husband. And my husband and I talked about that a lot. He knew that he wanted me to be there solidly for the children. So I think I sacrificed more time to be with my children. I think I ultimately knew that he wasn't going to be there for the long term.
Okay.
And we talked about it. We talked about this. I mean, of course I was there for my husband, but my youngest son, he's a tap dancer. And so he's a tap dancer, my youngest son. He does tap dancing. So, and he does a lot of tap dancing. So I wasn't prepared I wasn't prepared to not get him to his practices and to not get him to his competitions. So we sacrificed some time with my husband, with each other, so that we could make their lives as normal as possible and as ongoing in the things that they loved doing, so that they didn't have that full loss.
I'm gonna tell you what, I'm impressed. And I hope that there's people out there listening that can see this. But first of all, you had to have a beautiful relationship with your husband. I'm kind of getting teary-eyed here. Sorry.
Good.
But but that he could unselfishly say, our children need to come first. Because I'm sure no matter how much, if you want to call it faith or whatever, I don't know what you guys had or have, or what you practice, but like me, I have a lot of faith, and that has gotten me through so much. But for him to unselfishly say, our children need to come first, and so it's okay if you take care of them. That's how I would be. Like if I was in his shoes, but it doesn't, I'm not sure that my husband now would be like that. I mean, I hear about every little thing that hurts him, like, and I'm not used to that. It's like, really, yesterday, I think he said, can you look inside my ear? There's something that's bothering me. And it's, and then he had something on his leg, and I want to say, really? I mean, these are little tiny things that a kid would come to you about. And I'm not, I've been raised to be a strong person, and that's the way I've raised my kids. But so I'm really impressed with the relationship, first of all, that you had with your husband. And that you were able to, because I'm sure I can tell that you loved him so much, that must have been kind of a hard decision, because I'm sure you wanted to be with him too. But yet you did what he wanted. You guys decided was best for the children, and it's worked.
Yeah, I mean, we had lots of support. So he had, when he was in hospital, his mother was there sometimes, or his sister. So we did get lots of support, and I had lots of support. And there were times where I just couldn't be in the hospital, like I just needed,
Sure.
so there's lots of layers of stuff going on. My husband knew, and he had to compromise. It took him a while because I'm quite a strong woman, that I was putting my children first before me. And that took quite some time for him to get his head around, just as a husband when he was well,
Okay.
that actually when they needed, if they wanted to do tap dancing, particularly
Mhm.
my son, which my husband found very difficult because he thought that he should be playing a
I
male
was going to
sport.
ask you, did he think
Yeah,
that wasn't, yeah.
he
Well,
found that
we got to
hard.
stop that though, don't we?
We have to stop that
We
because
really
it
do.
was very clear that my son wanted to dance. And in fact,
There's nothing wrong with that.
there's nothing wrong with
Look at
it.
Fred. Do you know the name Fred Astaire?
Oh, he loves Fred Astaire.
Okay. That was a man that, was a wonderful dancer. Well, didn't he sing too?
Yeah, he did. And Michael Jackson. I mean, look, there's also like
Yeah.
Michael Jackson was an inspiration to my son. There's all sorts of amazing. I mean, look, there's amazing actors now who dance.
Yes.
Incredible. So
Yes.
it
But I mean,
took a while.
tap dancing though isn't something that our culture right now like looks at men doing.
No,
And that's sad to me.
it's really sad.
You
Yeah,
know,
it's really tough.
yeah. And it's sad to
Men
me that, now I didn't do this, but I see it around me all the time that the men tell their sons, it's men don't cry.
Yeah,
I hate that. Don't
yeah,
you? I
yeah,
mean, that's
yeah.
to meet a man that has a heart and can cry when he needs to cry. There's
Mm.
nothing wrong with that, but that's like almost obsolete now.
Yeah, well, my husband was a crier.
That's good. Well,
So he did a
too
lot of
much.
crying. He cried at movies. He cried with the children over a beautiful song they'd listened to. And so my children learnt a beautiful emotional kind of connection with their dad. So they were really
Well,
lucky.
that's good.
Whereas it's really nice, but yet
Yeah.
he just couldn't quite get his head around the dancing. But he came to terms with that. And I think he had to come to terms with the fact that my children or our children come first. They have to come first. We have to work our best at raising good humans.
Right.
It's your job as a parent. Well, it's my job. I
feel like it is mine too. So,
yeah,
but unfortunately, not everybody feels that way.
No. And also, unfortunately, people aren't resourced. I understand that poverty and systemic issues, and I get that. I'm actually quite a privileged person. I've grown up in my village. I come from a relatively privileged home. My children they can get tap dancing lessons. I mean, tap dancing lessons cost money. Well,
that's what I was going to ask you next was, so financially, were you hit hard?
Yeah, my husband, because he died of complications to the liver, I got no life insurance or anything. So things have been quite hard for me. But I've got a really good job, and I worked kind of another job after he died, and I have quite a bit of support, and I'm on top of things now. Yeah, it took a wee bit though.
So can I ask, what do? You don't have to tell me the name of
Yep, I'm a lecturer at the university here in Otago, the Otago University, which is in Dunedin. And I'm moving to another job in a month's time, which is in another teaching institution.
I was going to ask you, so a lecturer is like a teacher, right?
Yeah, like a teacher. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what do you lecture in?
I mainly, I don't now, I'm going into another more senior leadership role, but I've lectured in the Indigenous language of New Zealand. So I teach that language. It's Māori. You won't know it, but it's the native language of the country of New Zealand. So I've been teaching that as a and kind of the cultural aspects of our culture. And
So would it be like if somebody, well, let's say you moved to the United States, although you speak English.
Mhm.
So let's say, so we can't use you as an example, but somebody from
would be
China.
like a native language of America, or one of your
Right. So like if
native
somebody from China
tribes.
moved here, they would take English classes. I mean,
Mhm.
to learn to speak English. So
Yeah.
you teach how to
I
speak.
teach I teach how to speak the native language. So it would be like someone there. I don't know if there are courses where you learn the native language, native Indian language of tribal language of your
You
area.
can. My son had 12 years almost of Spanish,
Right.
only because our country is so bilingual.
Mm-hmm.
And probably half of our population now is Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
They come here from Mexico to have better jobs and uh, whatever. But we're like half of our population now is Spanish,
Right.
and so it's a big deal if you can speak in at least 2 or 3 different languages.
Right.
And so what like what my youngest is going into is into marketing. And so he would need to know several different languages.
Mm.
So that's been offered to him. He did go to a private school starting out, and at first grade, I don't know how you guys do in your grade levels, but in first grade, he started learning Spanish.
Right. Well, he's lucky.
Right. But he was going to a private school. Our public schools did not offer that.
Right.
So
okay. Yeah.
Anyway,
so I mean,
so that's what you do is you teach.
Yeah, teach another language.
And so what's your one coming up that you?
Well, I'm going into a senior executive role at another teaching institution. So it's more. I won't be teaching, but it'll be in a senior.
Be over the teachers?
Yeah, over the teachers, sort of managing that. So
yeah.
So I'm really lucky. I've got a good job and I'm fine. And COVID means that there's not a lot of travel, so I don't have a huge amount of expenses. And
so are you guys in shutdown? Are you doing classes?
We were on and off for the last 2 years, but at the moment we're not. We're open.
You see a second rising?
Probably. Yes. I mean, at the moment, we're all about getting vaccinations. So people are being vaccinated, and there's a bit of a movement against vaccinations, as there was in every country, conspiracy theorists, etc. So it's tricky, but New Zealand's been pretty good at managing our borders and keeping it out. But I think there's a second wave coming.
So we're about ready to shut down again. We have more cases now than 2 years ago when they shut us all down.
Yeah.
And it's not the problem. One of the problems, and this is just my personal opinion, what I see, and I feel like our governments know this, but that's just my own opinion. I've had my vaccinations. I don't know. I'm just going to say this because it doesn't matter. I feel like when you go through something, like I had COVID.
Right.
I had it and I had it bad. And I feel like that probably, getting through that was probably more of what they call a vaccine, which isn't really a vaccine. They're calling it that, but they shouldn't, because if it was, then it would have part of COVID in it, and they say it doesn't. But regardless, for me to even travel, I was forced into, you have to have the shot so you don't get to go anywhere. Nowhere. Okay. So I was forced into, and same way with all of our teachers. We went, the kids went back to school, but the teachers had to be vaccinated, and they had to have the booster too. But guess what? All those people are getting COVID again. Now, so it doesn't vaccinate you against it. It supposedly has made it to where if you do get it, it's not as bad. but yet we're having people die every day that have been both vaccinated, and
Yeah.
both shots. And so I tell people, because I also own a boutique, like, well, first of all, it's not a large store that you go into, but so it's smaller, but I won't let more than 4 people in at a time. And they, as soon as they walk in the door, I hand them a sanitizer. They need to sanitize their hands.
Yeah.
And I do allow them to use the fitting room, which is also the bathroom.
Right.
But I go right in after they're done and I disinfect everything for the next person. And I think that's the biggest thing. If everybody, the mask thing is only protecting if you're coughing or sneezing somebody else. Okay.
Yeah.
But that's not protection for you.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But if everybody would have to wash, if they had somebody at the door of everything that you walked into say, here, you can't come in unless you wash your hands or sanitize your hands, and then you just did it automatically when you left, I think there'd be less cases.
Yeah.
But
it's a scary world, though, isn't it? We just don't know where this is going to end up.
It is scary. But I know that with my kids, I've just said, you know what? First of all, try not to be in large areas with a whole bunch of people. But second of all, remember to keep the sanitizer on you. My daughter ended up just getting, and she's had all 3, and she just got it a week ago, and she's really bad. And she doesn't even go anywhere, but she chose to. They're looking for a new house to move into. And so she went and looked at a house with a realtor. Okay, well, that was an open house. So that day, lots of people went through it and they touched everything. And I said to her, you've been so careful. Did you see the realtor? Did she wipe everything down before you came in? And she said, no. And I said, okay, so you touched everything that everybody else that has walked through here. And I don't think people understand how many times a day you touch your face.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Without even knowing. I see people doing this all the time, pulling their hair back, or they got an itch here, but it's, you don't even know you're doing it. So I said, so how long were you in the house? And she said, probably 40, 45 minutes. You know how many times she touched stuff and then touched her face? Okay. So that's, and that's one time she went out. She has not been going anywhere in public. But she's really, really, really bad. She's on her 6th day of having high fevers, and it's in her chest, and our hospitals are full, so she can't go in the hospital.
Gosh, it's scary.
So it's scary. It is. And I'm like, why didn't you think about that going in? Why? I mean, I would have wore gloves if I was going to go in. Me. I just think that's where we pass it the most is touching, but that's just my opinion. I mean, I have a lot of people who agree with me, but more people, I think, they're more apt to accept sanitizer as they walk into place than to wear the mask.
We're pretty good in New Zealand. We all wear masks. It's not a problem. Everyone wears a mask and hand sanitizers everywhere. We're actually pretty good.
And that's good because you won't have as much outbreak. You know what I'm saying?
No, yeah.
So, and like but ours has, because they took away all that mandate, so you don't have to do any of that stuff anymore here. And here came Thanksgiving and Christmas, and people got together, and all that stuff. And it has spread more than it was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
All of our hospitals are full. You can't even get into them. Everything's going to close down again. And to me, that's people not doing what they should do.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's sad. But anyway, we got off the subject, didn't we?
Yeah.
So, but you know what? People want to know too how it's going in another country. So, are you guys like shut down for people to come into your country?
We have been. It's at the moment not completely, no, but we have this period where you have to come in and be in quarantine and to assess whether you've got COVID or not, where you've come into the country. So there's different,
Right.
it's sort of different, it's a green light, red light system.
So like if I flew to New Zealand, I would have to immediately
Be
go
in
in
quarantine. Yeah.
Wow, that'd be expensive if you were going to
Yeah,
stay.
I actually don't really know how that works. I think there's a space that you can go to, but I'm not too
Really?
sure.
That'd
Yeah,
be
well, I mean, we're in the South Island, so like the end of the world, really. We are. So where I live, we're pretty isolated. So I feel a little less affected, but I probably shouldn't feel like that. I should probably be a little bit more vigilant. But New Zealanders tend to be like that because we're like this little country at the end of the world.
Do you love where you live?
Yeah, I do. I've done a bit of travel and I do, but I'm a homebody. I've grown up in a rural town in my village, and and New Zealand's beautiful.
Is it
There's a
beautiful?
lot of movies are done in New Zealand because it's so stunning. So Lord of the
So is there a lot
Rings,
of hills and mountains and
yeah, mountains and skiing, and it's sort of like a little bit like Canada in some parts,
okay.
and yeah, but I love I love where I'm from. I love my home. Everyone's different. Some people like to travel and they like to go overseas, and I'm just not that person.
Mhm. Okay. So you feel like you haven't really gone through all the grieving, but I think you're doing wonderful.
Thank you.
And you're not holding back, right?
No, not really. I do sometimes, but probably my best and closest friends would say that I'm holding back, but they know
Really?
me well. So I think that's probably a good thing that they do that, because they know me deeply, and so they can say that. I don't mind them saying that.
Okay. Well, so you're here to actually help other women or men
Mm-hmm.
that have lost a spouse. So what would you say to them? Because you are managing, you're not in a
Mm-hmm.
depression.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing quite
Mm-hmm.
well as far as taking care of your children and financially and stuff. So what advice would you have?
Oh, what advice? I think if they're isolated, is to find a group.
Mhm.
So, but my group is I've naturally got a group around me. But if you're isolated, I think it might be on Facebook, it might be a podcast, it might be something to connect with others and that are in the grief club, I call it,
Okay.
because I think having some support around you is actually very important, because there are going to be those days where you just need to talk to someone.
Right.
And for me, I've just naturally had that with my wider family. I think always look at, this is going to sound cliche, but always look at something, take every day and find something good in every day. Every day wake up if you can, and every day I think about why I'm here on this earth, why I'm alive, and the one good thing about today.
That's
Because
very good.
it's important, because life's so short, and I don't really have a faith, but I do believe I'm here for a reason. And I do believe that my husband was taken for a reason. He had a very short, full life, and that was for a reason. And
Well, here
so
you
just
are. Here
here
you
I am.
are. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah. So there is a light in every day, and find it. It might just be that you had a really great cup of coffee. It doesn't really matter what it is, just something.
Mhm.
That's probably my only advice, which probably isn't very good, but
No, I think it is. I think it's important. You said find a group. Um, and yes, wake up every day and find something good in that day. A lot of people tell you, well, I can't do that.
of course.
But so we really, I feel like people need to make, whether they find it on Google or somewhere on the internet, or even like where I found you, you can go and type in on Instagram inspirations,
Mm-hmm.
and so make inspirational little notes wherever, there is, get up and shower today. I mean, to start out with, because I know a lot of times when you first lose somebody, this is how a lot of people that I talk to react, is they don't want to do anything.
That's right.
They just want to wallow in their grief, and and people that haven't lost somebody like get in that mode too. So yeah, I think you need to post little post-it notes all over the place of affirmations. I have a push journal, and I fill it out every night before I go to bed, what I'm going to do the next day. But the first thing I do, and that's just me, but the first thing I do is be thankful that I woke up and I'm alive. Okay. Some people will say, I don't feel like that, but I feel like that because I have children and I want to be there for them as long as I can, so I guess it depends on the person, but to me, I'm thankful that I woke up and that I'm there another day to help my children through life and to live life. So then the second thing is, take a shower. But I have a list of things I'm going to do. And I think when you have that and you can check them off, that's like, even if you don't get through it all, if you can, even get through half of them, it's a step towards getting better.
And I think there's also, for me, I often think about others worse off than myself.
Absolutely.
And I think for me, and that's probably, sometimes it feels really horrible to think about that, but reading stories of children in war-torn countries that have lost their entire family, or COVID, for example. COVID's terrible, what it's done to communities. So there are always someone far worse off than yourself. Always. And I think that's useful.
Absolutely. And I tell that to people all the time. So I think that's really good advice there too. So see, you are giving things more than you know. And so can you tell, do you think joking? Well,
yeah, well, I'm big on laughter and comedy, and my children, we laugh about everything. And my husband loved British comedy. My children love American comedy. So yeah, laughter is as cliche it is, it's medicine. You've got to laugh.
It is.
And we laugh about my husband all the time, the silly things he did, and we talk about him a lot. He's alive in our household.
That you're saying that you're not saying, which is to keep their memory alive. And I think that's important. Instead of hiding that, you really need to keep that, so like when my brother passed, and he went through a very horrible death, but he had faith. He's like, I was here for a reason, and I'm sad that I'm leaving my 4 children without a father. But I had a reason, and I know that, and I feel like I know where I'm going, so I'm good with it. And he said to me, I need you to make sure that all of my kids remember who I am. That was my goal, that he gave me. And I can't always do that. I try, but I don't have control over them. It's not like they live with me. They're with their mom. And but I do myself like a celebration of life every year for him. And to me, that's just me. When the first time, so when I lost my mom, we had just been she was also a professor, an English professor. So that's kind of funny not funny, but anyway, so what was I getting to?
About keeping his memory alive, or your mum's memory alive?
Oh, no. So my mom and I, like a couple months before she passed, we went to another friend of hers, which was a teacher, her mother's funeral. And her mother requested, instead of people grieving, crying and all that kind of stuff. She said, I want them to celebrate my life. So after we had a small service, my mom's friend had to get up and she said, so my mother's wishes are that she doesn't want anybody walking out of here crying, that she's gone, but to remember all the good things about her. So what she wants is for somebody, anybody to get up and say, what is the funniest memory you have or the happiest memory you have, of my mother. And by the time we left there, we were all laughing. We weren't, crying. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't cry, because you shouldn't. But I'm saying that we walked out of there laughing and feeling good. And my mom remembered that. So when she was dying, she said to me, I know your dad's not going to like this because our tradition is not this, but I want that. I want everybody to talk about my good things that they remember and the funny things and everything. And I want them walking out feeling good, not sad, because I'm okay now. My pain's going to be gone, all those things. So that's what I've done with my brother.
Yeah.
Is every year I celebrate his life.
Yeah. I mean, that's important. You have to.
And yes, and I try as much as possible to, and not overdo it. I miss him a lot. And there's, I was very close to him. So he was like my best friend that I could talk to, but so I don't like dwell on talking about him or anything, but I don't pull back. If something comes up and it's something he did or would have said or something, I'll say it. And, I've of course got pictures. But we don't obsess about it, but we talk about it and it's supposed to be okay.
Yeah, it is. It's important. Their spirit's still there. And I think, my children talk about him all the time. Yeah. And as a normal part of, often they'll joke and say, oh my gosh, you can't cook, because he was a great cook. You're such a terrible cook. Like, he would be appalled at this meal, Mum. And so we just laugh. So they take the mickey out of me. So it's, I mean, that's great. That's great, because then his living memory will go to their children and so forth. It's important.
So what are we going to do about the daughter?
Well, I'm just giving her some space and time. I think she's really close with my mum. She's got really good relationships with her cousins and some aunties. So she's pretty stubborn. She's a lot like me. And so we were always going to have quite a fractious kind of relationship in a way. We get on really well, but she's her own person. So I just sort of think I'm just biding my time. And I think I'll just give her as much space as she needs to be a teenager. And a lot of it's down to some good timing and luck. Hoping that she actually gets some good friends. And, she's pretty busy. She's a tap dancer as well. And she does singing. And she does a lot of performing arts. So she's quite busy. So I've kept her pretty busy, which I think is probably quite useful. I'm just cross fingers and hope for the
Very
best.
Useful. So it's been 3 years? Two?
Yeah. 2019,
But
27th of August, 2009. August, 27th of August, 2019.
So it'll be 3 years.
Maybe 3 years. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So one thing we need to reassure people is that there's no time limit in our grieving. Number two, we can't let it take over our lives, though, which obviously you haven't done. That hasn't taken over your life.
No, I think you've just got to lean into the grief when it's there. And I think, you've got to live with it. You've got to learn to live with it. I think you've got to live with that loss. And yeah, I was raised in a doing sort of a family that got on, pretty hard rural family. So I was always going to pull my socks up and put my boots on and, get back into life because that's the way I've been raised.
Right.
I know it's not that easy for others, and I know how tough it is for people. I just have a lot of support around me, and I guess have always, and my children need me.
Right.
They need me to be a functioning mother
I love that.
who can just sit there and cry with them, but can also take them to their rugby and tap dancing practices. Like it's important that I'm
And
there for
you've
them.
made sure that life has gone on, that everything doesn't stop, but yet you're still honoring him in different ways. And that's wonderful. So I think you've had actually a lot to give to people that you may not feel like that, but I really think you have. And please, if you ever do need to talk, know that I know you have a lot of support, so you wouldn't need me, but I want you to know that I am here. So
I've appreciated this. It's been really nice, and actually another part of the grief process is talking. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. So I just want to thank you so much for coming on in such a short notice. And so what if somebody wants to reach out to you, maybe from Instagram that, so what can you tell us?
They can message me on Instagram. I don't even know what I am on Instagram quite
I couldn't
a lot,
understand it. I couldn't, like my son said, what's her name? And I'm like,
right. Yeah. So I can spell it out. So I'm on Instagram. My name is my village and my birth date. So it's an Indigenous name. So it's OTAKOU 73.
Is 73 the year you were born?
Yeah, I was born. Yeah.
So because he's like, is it otaku?
Yeah, it is. Very good. That's very good. It's an Indigenous name, so it's hard to say.
Oh, yay me, because I'm not very good at pronunciation, even though my mom was an English teacher. She used to get on me all the time. I can spell really good. Right. But if you listen to some of my podcasts and my co-host, it's become a funny thing. It started out as I was being corrected a lot, and I started getting the low self-esteem about it. Especially with my mother correcting every sentence I said grammatically,
Right. Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I know that, but do we all speak properly? No, we use a lot of slang words, and whatever. But she was a teacher and she was teaching English and grammar, and so you're supposed to speak correctly and pronounce words.
No, you did well on that one. So
I can spell really good. One of the words that's really funny. One of the words that she always said something to me about, and I knew how to pronounce it. It's just when you say it fast, it doesn't sound, but it's ambulance.
Yeah.
And I noticed, I was getting a low self-esteem about that because every time I said ambulance, should say ambulance.
Right.
I know that's what I said, but I was saying it fast. And I finally, just for her, started pronouncing it ambulance. Well, that takes longer, right? But so I listen to other people. They all say ambulance. They do.
Yeah, we all mumble.
But that got me started. So we actually joke on my podcast about when I can't pronounce something. My co-host, I'll say, just pronounce it for me. And they do it. So it's really helped me. It's actually helped me not feel bad about myself. That I don't pronounce everything. I pronounce things how they're spelled instead of, and if you've studied, you obviously can speak English. Is that your native?
That's my first language. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, but we have a lot of slang words. We have a lot of words that are pronounced the same way, but mean different things. There's a lot. That has to be the hardest language to learn.
Oh, English is terrible. And New Zealanders, like Americans, speak very clearly to me. New Zealanders mumble, and we're very hard to understand.
See, I think you're really good to understand.
I do try,
But
but
I love. That is my favorite accent is the English accent. It's just, I love it. I love it. So I was like so excited. I'm like, New Zealand, New Zealand. That's what the English accent, right? My son's like, yes, yes, yes. I'm like, I'm so excited.
That's
So
good.
anyway, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christy. I'll go and attend to my children now. It's
Okay,
been lovely to talk to you. Thank you so
and
much.
you too. And thank you so much for giving all your advice and good luck.
Thank
I
you.
don't think you need it, but I want you to know that you're going to be in my thoughts and
Thank you.
that you have, I'm sure today that you have helped a lot of people.
Thank you.
All right. Have a
Thank
good
you.
night.
Okay.